I have a confession to make. I am really not a UK drill fan. Like, it's one of those genres where I've tried and tried to get into it, but it's just never clicked, which has really annoyed me because I really love the recent UK hip-hop scene and grime revival. Yeah, I reckon the reason why I love that, but not UK drill, is because for me personally, UK drill is really stylistically boring. Like, grime is its own distinct thing, its own distinct style. When the revival happened, it felt refreshing. It felt like something different to US trap rap. Whereas drill, on the other hand, just feels like a different version of US trap rap. But when I say stylistically boring, I mean more so in the fact that it's really hard to differentiate drill artists from each other because there's so little variance in style. Like, there's barely anyone that has a unique production style to them. Whereas with grime, on the other hand, when the revival was truly happening, one of the things that kept it having momentum, that kept it feeling fresh, was the variance between artists. Like, Skepta was bringing grime back to its roots. Then Kano started adding brass and extra layers of instrumentation to it. Then had Stormzy taking more of an R&B and gospel approach. You had Dave with the more deep, conscious lyricism. And then this has continued in recent years. You've had Little Simz adding aspects of soul, adding strings, adding reggae aspects, adding 2000 freestyle grime. And then in this year alone, we've had a rise of UK hip-hop artists adding more of a world hip-hop emphasis to their work, such as Nines and Jay Hoos having an Afrobeat style to them, Riz Ahmed's album having an Indian Desi hip-hop influence. Whereas drill, there's barely anything to differentiate the artists aside from whether or not they're wearing a mask. But this year, we finally seem to get a glimmer of hope. And it looked like it could be quite a bright glimmer of hope because it was from one of the main drill artists, Headie, who had been around for a while, but was one of the first drill artists to truly make a significant impact in terms of popularity, particularly last year with his mixtape Music X Road, and which had some solid beats right across it, particularly in regards to the singles such as Both. And then this year, he finally did something I'd never seen in a drill artist before. Some form of stylistic uniqueness and variance, where he started taking a more electronic approach to his work, bringing in some of the creme de la creme of UK electronica, FKA Twigs, Sampha, Jamie XX, doing guest features, and there were some pretty good tracks on the EP, such as the Jamie XX track Smoke. So I was fairly hyped for this upcoming release, not only by the prospect of finally seeing some unique stylistic variants within drill, but also the fact that it's a debut album. As in, he'd done mixtapes and EPs and all that stuff before, but this was him finally giving a more well-rounded, solid, artistic statement. Like, I was expecting the drill equivalent of Stormzy's Gang Signs and Prayers. I was like, oh, we're finally going to get a significant, brilliant quality release from the UK drill subgenre. Well, let's find out. This is a review of Headie 1's Edna. One of the things a great UK hip-hop debut needs is a solid opening track, or as Todd in the Shadows has called it, a Bitch I'm Here track or a Bitch I'm Back track. That's something that made Skepta's Konnichiwa and Stormzy's Gang Sign and Prayer album so great, with their tracks Konnichiwa and First Things First. A solid statement of intent. This is who I am and this is my style, with a solid, hard beat to it to let you know, yep, I'm here, this is my debut, either this is my entrance to the scene or I'm securing my place on the scene. And it's fair to say, Edna doesn't quite achieve that. Particularly in the main problem that the intro is split between two tracks, Teach Me and Palm 35. Like, if you're watching a good film, you want a solid opening scene and then the film starts. Not two opening scenes before the film starts. That kind of overly drags it out and sort of dampens their effect. But one of the things that makes this even worse is the fact that these tracks don't even have that much harder a rhythm to them. They aren't much stylistically distinct from the rest of the album. And that is where my major complaint with the album comes in. Mostly, it is just your standard drill US trap rap derivative album. I mean, granted, it's clear Headie was aiming for a heavily US-based style with Drake and Future as guest features. So it's clear to say that even if they weren't featuring on the album, this album pretty much would have sounded roughly the same regardless. But yeah, so you have an opening track, instead of an opening track, you have 2 opening tracks, so that overly drags out the intro and the statement of intent. That they don't particularly stand out compared to the rest of the album. And how about telling us about the artist? Well, the opening track, Teach Me, funnily enough, doesn't teach me much about the artist. It just sounds like your standard, uninspired UK drill track. I mean, you'd expect... we do eventually learn about the artist on Palm 35, which finally addresses some of his personal troubles, like going to prison earlier this year. In fact, this album should be a whole lot more personal. It's named Edna after his mum. Yet, by this point, we don't really care. The opening track should have been the statement of intent, but it wasn't. It was just a dull, uninspired track. And then we get to the second track before we learn about him. On the whole, it's just not a great start. And yeah, sets the precedent for this being a fair bit of wasted potential, in my opinion. Where the quality of this album improves, however, is in the singles. Headie does seem to have quite a talent for being a very chart-based artist, having good, solid singles similar to the likes of Stormzy and AJ Tracey, who, funnily enough, both feature on the main single from the album, Ain't It Different, which is a pretty great track. It does delve into some of the artist's personal woes. It does mention his time in prison. Stormzy and AJ give solid verses, and more importantly is it actually has a great hook to it. It's like, baby, are you up for it? Really catchy, really sticks with you, and a lot of the most notable tracks on this album are the ones that have more pop appeal to them, such as Princess Cuts, which is currently the other biggest hit from the album since it's just been released, and also the track with Future, Hear No Evil. That's got a pretty good catchiness to it and some pretty memorable lyrics which could sound pretty badass in certain context. With the lines like money and power, cocaine, gunpowder, that's pretty great. You can see that sticking with you for a while. As for one of the other major singles from the album, Only You Freestyle with Drake, yeah, I know it's a freestyle, but it sounds pretty cluttered, rushed, and really could have done with a bit of extra production polish to shape it up, and Drake just sounds absolutely awful on it. Like, I really appreciate what Drake has done. Like, I know opinions on this have been varied, but I personally think Drake has been a great support to the UK hip-hop scene. Like, you think, oh, he's just collaborating with the artist to get some street cred that are always with this hip new style. But when he's done stuff like fund programs and TV shows that are based around UK hip-hop culture, such as Top Boy, when you're not just featuring with the artist, you're actually supporting the culture as a whole, I think he's been pretty great in terms of that. But judging by this, he should just leave the UK artists to do what they do best. This emphasis on Headie being far better as like a pop end of UK hip-hop sort of artist continues as the album goes on towards its end, where it takes a more R&B approach. These tracks feel a lot stronger and far more memorable than a lot of the more derivative trap-based tracks that unfortunately make up a lot of the filler-like run, particularly on the final track, Cold. That's one that was pretty good, I thought, and could potentially work as a single if it was released in such a way, although singles are becoming pretty irrelevant since with streaming you can just listen to all the album tracks and potentially get all of them into the top 40 like with Stormzy and Ed Sheeran. Ooh. And then really the only other notable track which was actually pretty good was The Light, which is one where we actually delve into like Headie's personal experiences, him coping with fame while at the same time and being in prison earlier this year, and then focusing on him seeing the light and getting through the dark times towards it. I think this would have been far better as the intro track, truly setting out an idea of who this artist is, what he's been through, and why you should care. This would have been far better as a statement of intent and should have been the first track instead of 2 opening tracks that are both really forgettable and stylistically totally ununique in terms of production style. On the whole, this album is just pretty forgettable. This as a debut album, this should have been a big statement of intent, but really, Headie One does not really have a distinct or unique style. Like, most of the tracks on this album just sound like your standard UK drill, US trap rap based tracks, and most of which just feel like really forgettable filler on this 20-track album. The singles are pretty catchy, and he does finally delve into some personal details on some tracks, like Palm 35 and far more effectively on The Light, and he shows better emphasis on his pop side on the later R&B influenced tracks. But on the whole, this album just feels like wasted potential, a chance to finally get a definitive album statement from a drill artist, and a drill artist that finally developed a more unique production style. But alas, this album has not provided on that. On the whole, I give this album a 6 out of 10. It would be closer to a 7 if there were more tracks like the singles, but as it is, this is a 6 out of 10, leaning far closer to a 5. As for the best tracks, I would definitely say the singles have got some pretty great production and some pretty great hooks to them, which make them stick with you far more than a lot of the rest of the tracks album. So that's of the tracks on the album. So that's particularly stuff like Ain't It Different, Princess Cuts, Hear No Evil, and some of the more R&B based tracks like the final track, Cold. And also The Light, I really like how it delves into a lot of the more personal aspects of Headie's life, which is what a lot more of the tracks on the album should have done. And then as for the worst tracks, well, just far too many to count on this, huge 20-track release. Just so many tracks that just sound like filler and just sound way too much like they could be by any UK drill artist that truly like any unique, distinct style and just completely go in one ear, out the other. There's kind of so many to list right here. 21 Gun Salute, Only You Freestyle, even the opening track, Teach Me, Bumpy Ride, just pretty much anything that's other than all the tracks I mentioned in the best track section, with the exception of maybe Palm 35, just how it tries to go into more personal lyricism in the same way The Light did. If you're looking for more artists and albums like this one, I definitely recommend a lot of the UK hip-hop that's more prevalent on the charts, that has a bit more pop appeal, particularly some of the works by Nines, Loski and J Hoos, which are very good at being particularly catchy and memorable since they have more of a Afrobeat and dancehall emphasis to them, particularly of some of the artists they've collaborated with Nines collaborating with NSG, J Hoos collaborating with Burna Boy and Coffee, and Loski collaborating with Popcorn, and a lot of the more majorly successful UK hip-hop artists such as Stormzy, AJ Tracey and Mostack. And in terms of some of the ones that are less prevalent on the charts, but I think actually have some good beats and could potentially get better, I definitely recommend some of the artists like M24, Swarmz, Poundz, Nadia Rose, and Ambush Buzzworl tend to have a lot tighter and more memorable production than a lot of drill artists have heard. But if you want to listen to the more alternative end of UK hip-hop, which is what this album could have been if it had gone down more of the electronic route, definitely try Riz Ahmed. He's got some fantastic solid beats and has got a very uniquely distinct style of how he mixes Desi and Indian hip-hop with grime. And of course last year's album Grey Area by Little Simz, which is in my opinion the greatest UK hip-hop album ever made. It's intensely personal yet also intensely confident, and so much variety in terms of production style. It's hard to find two tracks that sound the same. You've got a constantly switching between stuff that's more soul and R&B based, stuff of like a 2003 grime style, stuff with a reggae emphasis, stuff with like tons of strings in the instrumentation, and just tons of great features throughout, like Chronix, Michael Kiwanuka and Little Dragon. Definitely check out that album. But as for this album, aside from the singles, you can kind of skip on it if you want to. Well, comment what you think of my controversial genre opinions. I'm going for now. Goodbye.